Pregnant wife is spiraling over our past, begging me to take back my honesty about evening the score during our break. My wife is currently pregnant, and we're going through something intense that traces back to a single thing I said, something I simply can't take back. Let me explain our history, because it matters. We first met when we were both 22. We tumbled into one of those exclusive situationships, both of us swirling with feelings that neither of us wanted to name. She told me she loved me, but said she wanted to be single and explore herself. Instead of choosing me, she chased that freedom, and eventually ended up with someone else. She knew it would destroy me, and it did. I cut her off completely. For years, we had no contact. I tried to move on, but some invisible thread always pulled at me. Fate threw us together again when we were 27. Even after everything, the feelings were immediately back, sharp as ever, sitting heavy between us. This time, things were different. She apologized with her whole heart, committed to personal therapy, and we spent hours in those raw, vulnerable talks people have when they're patching something broken. We moved slowly, rebuilding trust. We were happy, really happy, setting out shared goals and talking honestly about the future. I started to picture marriage, and, eventually, we got engaged. 7 months into our engagement, the ghost of our past clawed its way back. She got an Instagram request from the same guy, the one she had left me for. All he did was message hello, but she responded politely. That moment cut me deeper than anything. My mind spun with questions. Why hadn't she just ignored him? Why hadn't her first instinct been to protect us, to talk to me before even responding? Deep down, it felt like she simply couldn't resist the feeling of being wanted by him, still chasing those old echoes of validation. She tried explaining that she thought it was nothing, that she didn't realize it would bother me. But I couldn't move past it. Eventually, I broke off our engagement. As much as it hurt me, and it did, I could see it broke her even more. While we were separated, things got even uglier. I didn't know what I wanted. We kept seeing each other, and I kept sleeping with her even as I chased after something new, dating and sleeping around. She knew, but, somehow, she stayed with me, clinging to the broken pieces. Eventually, the damage I was doing became too hard to ignore. I told her that being with me like this was only wrecking her even further, and that I should just let her go. But something in me was also, twistedly, impressed by what she would endure for me. After months apart, we found our way back to one another for good. We got married. My wife acknowledged her part in the mess. The other people I'd been with during our breakup never meant much to me, even if I was unsure about our future. But before we got engaged again, I shared something profound, and, perhaps, cruel. I told her I didn't regret what I'd done, because in a warped sense, it felt like it finally balanced the scales between us. She had once left me behind, wounded and pining. Now, she'd been forced to fight for me, too. Maybe it was toxic, but it gave me closure. I finally felt things were even. She didn't like hearing that, but she accepted it, and we pressed on. The next 3 years of our marriage were genuinely good. Now, with her 5 months pregnant, the old wounds have started bleeding again. She's spiraling hard, crying every day, falling apart, telling me that I cheated right in front of her. She begs me to take back what I told her, to pretend I didn't need to sleep with others during our separation. But I can't erase what happened, or deny the truth I've lived, especially when, from where I stand, she was the one who left the door open to the past by responding to that guy's message. So I doubled down and told her no, she always knew about this, and I'm not rewriting history. Update 1. I had spent the previous day completely numbed out at work, unable to focus on anything but the swirling mass of thoughts in my head. That night, instead of going home, I slept at my office, just to escape it all for a little while. Now, sitting here at home with the place so quiet because she's staying at her mom's right now, I'm trying to put words to everything I've been feeling. When I was away, she called me so many times I lost count, but I didn't pick up. I needed a buffer, to process, to figure out how I even felt and what I could possibly say. Despite everything, I know I'm deeply attached to her. Maybe we're even a bit codependent these days. Still, I needed that distance before facing her and the mess between us. When I finally walked through the door, she greeted me with this exhausted look, like she hadn't slept the whole night. I stopped her before she could retreat into the kitchen and told her, "We need to talk first." There was no small talk, just a heavy tension that sat between us. I told her, "Before I say anything else, I want you to know I'm willing to give us another shot. But I'm also being honest with myself, I'm still reevaluating if this marriage should continue." The look in her eyes made it clear she was holding back tears, but to her credit, she listened patiently. I admitted to her how much I wished our history wasn't so tangled and full of baggage. I said I wished things had played out differently, that I wasn't ever going to outright admit I cheated on her, because I hadn't. But I loved her, and I still empathize with the pain she feels. I hated how much it hurt her, even if I can't share her view of the past. I needed her to finally understand that she can't keep demanding I say I regret what I did. The truth is, breaking up with her and not being sure I wanted her as my partner was a reaction to what happened during our engagement. Back then, when she let an old connection back into her life, it forced me to question everything. Long before that, I'd already felt the inequality. When she left me for someone else years ago, I'd asked her to be my girlfriend and she refused. She ended things with me on a technicality, making it easier for herself to walk away without being the bad guy. That left a mark on me, made me insecure, maybe even a bit toxic. But in some twisted way, my actions later on made the relationship feel a little more balanced. For once, she knew what it was like not to have all of my loyalty, just like I had to experience with her. I told her straight out, while I wish none of this had happened, she has to accept where I'm coming from. She can't keep projecting her own guilty conscience onto me, and none of this would have happened if her choices hadn't come first. Maybe it would have been better if we'd never gotten back together, but we did, and now we have a family. I made it clear that these have always been my feelings, just as I was honest about them when we reconciled. I told her I needed her to let me know, within a reasonable time, if she can truly live with that or not. I'm willing to go to marriage counseling with her, but I'm also clear about my boundaries and what I can and cannot say. I told her if she couldn't accept that, then we'd have to decide what's best for our child, together or apart. That broke her. She cried harder than I've ever seen, worse even than the time she first admitted her guilt and apologized for leaving me years ago. She sobbed out that she doesn't want to lose me, but she doesn't feel like I truly choose her. She admitted the ugly irony, that this is exactly how I felt during our relationship, back when she broke the boundaries between us. Hearing her acknowledge that stopped me. It proved she saw the parallel, even if it's unbearable for both of us. Then she confessed that she realized, after thinking things through, a big part of why she wanted me to say what she did was because she still hasn't really forgiven herself for leaving me for her ex all those years ago. That was the greatest mistake of her life, she said. Even though our life together is good now, she said she needed something beyond therapy, she needed validation from me. In her mind, if I would just say I regretted what I'd done and how I'd felt, it would finally allow her to forgive herself and move on. That revelation moved me. I hadn't understood, until that moment, that guilt was the force behind her vulnerability and tailspins of shame. My refusal to recant, she said, just made her ashamed all over again and deepened those wounds. I tried to let her know, I was hurt back then, lost and unsure of us, and I made choices I thought were necessary. I see now how much pain they caused her, and I promised her I'd never repeat them. I told her that today, the truth is, I want her, and only her. It felt like a breakthrough we both needed. We both admitted it, deep down, all either of us really wants is to feel chosen. That, at least, is a place to start from. In the end, even with tears soaking both our faces, what kept surfacing was our love for each other. We kissed through the pain, broke down together, and spent those dawn hours just holding on to each other. And yet, despite that closeness, I couldn't silence the voice inside me telling me that our deepest issues are still unresolved. Update 2. 2 days after that night where we fell apart and held on to each other anyway, we ended up in a therapist's office. Beige couch, soft lamps, a box of tissues that might as well have had our names on it. I felt like I was walking into a courtroom for our history, and in a way, I guess we were. The therapist didn't waste time. She said, "You two don't fight about facts, you fight about the meaning you've assigned to them." And then she asked us to stop treating the past like a ledger. She wanted us to try 2 things, closure for any loose threads, and a clean script going forward. Simple words that felt like trying to move a mountain with a spoon. When she asked about loose threads, my wife went very still. I know that look now, like she's standing on the edge of a truth she doesn't want to say out loud. She took a breath, looked at me, and said there was something she hadn't told me about that hello message back when we were engaged. She said she'd replied, yes, and then a week later she agreed to meet him for coffee. 20 minutes before work, in a busy place. She swore nothing happened, said she told him she was choosing me. She said she left shaking because she knew, if she'd told me back then, I would have ended things immediately and we wouldn't be here. She said she thought she could bury it because the conclusion was the same, me, us, but that it's been rotting ever since. The words hit me like someone pulled the floor away. It wasn't the 20 minutes. It wasn't even that she chose secrecy at the time. It was the feeling that I had been the only one carrying that panicked, am I really first? Question, while she'd had an answer she never gave me. I got up and told the therapist I needed 5 minutes. I ended up walking the block 3 times and calling no one. I didn't want to blow the whole thing up in a hallway. When I came back in, the therapist was calm, and my wife was crying silently in that contained way where her shoulders barely move. The therapist asked me what I needed to feel safe. I said I needed the truth in my house to be bright and unflinching. I said I needed that chapter shut for good, not by pretending it wasn't written, but by actually writing the last page. So the therapist had us draft a no-contact message, right there, to send to him from her phone with me watching. I expected to feel triumphant or vindicated. Instead, it just felt heavy, final. She typed it, that she loved her husband, that contacting her had blown a hole into a part of her life she's rebuilding, that she needed him to respect our family and never reach out again. She hit send, blocked his profile, then deleted his name from her phone while I watched. The irony is that when we left the session and were idling at a red light, my phone pinged. A DM request on Instagram, from him. He must have sent it before she blocked him, or maybe he found me some other way. It was a short message. He said he was sorry for interfering, that he didn't know I knew everything, that when they got that coffee she told him she was choosing her future and he was just chasing a ghost. He said he was getting divorced and had reached out because loneliness makes you arrogant. I stared at it while the light turned green and she squeezed my hand without saying a word. I deleted it without responding. I don't know if that was the right call. It felt like the only one that didn't add more fire. The next morning we had the anatomy scan. Hospitals always smell like something between clean and sad. She lay back and I held her ankle because it felt less intrusive than her hand, and we watched our child shift and glow on the screen like a secret being revealed. The tech told us we're having a girl. I didn't expect the way that would hit me. A daughter. Suddenly every score I've kept, every point I've tried to balance, felt obscene. The tech found a couple of little irregular beats in the heart. She told us it's common, that it often resolves by birth, but she booked a follow-up with a fetal cardiologist just in case. My wife squeezed hard on my wrist and I felt her breath go tight, and I told her we were okay even though the word cardiologist rattled around my head like a marble in a jar for the rest of the day. We stopped by her mom's on the way home because she still had some of my wife's prenatal vitamins and, honestly, because neither of us wanted to go back to the quiet. Her mom hugged her too long, the way moms do when they sense you're one thread away from coming apart. Then, when my wife went to the bathroom, her mom sat down across from me and put 2 fingers to her temple like she was making a hard call. She said, "She's going to be furious I told you this, but I can't watch her drown in it anymore." And then she told me something I didn't know existed in the universe of us. At 23, before the cutoff, when she was with him, my wife got pregnant and had an abortion. Her mom took her. She said my wife never told me because everything she loved about me was tied to the version of herself who hadn't done that, and when we got back together, she wanted a life with me that was clean of that pain. She said the pregnancy now has cracked the seal on that secret and that my refusal to rewrite my own past is pushing against a wall she already hates herself for. When my wife came back into the room and saw me looking at her like I didn't recognize the weight she'd been carrying, she knew. She didn't yell. She sat next to me and folded in on herself and said, "I'm sorry. I couldn't figure out how to tell you without changing how you look at me. I didn't want to be the girl who made mistakes you could never forget." She said she'd told her therapist years ago, but never me, and it's been eating her alive, and the baby, our baby, made all the ghosts in the room louder. I don't know what the right thing is to feel when you learn that about the person you love. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was grief for her. Grief for how alone she must have felt, and also a mean little stab of shame at the way I'd been holding up my hurt like a trophy. I kept looking at her hands and thinking those were the same hands that had pulled me back into her life, the same hands that were going to hold our daughter, and I felt this fierce, almost painful urge to protect her from every version of herself that ever thought she had to carry things alone. That night we did something the therapist suggested and that I had rolled my eyes at when she said it. We wrote down everything we'd been keeping score about on separate sheets of paper, the petty things, the catastrophic things, the moments we've used like weapons. We didn't show each other. Then we stood over the kitchen sink with a saucepan as a little funeral pyre because we don't have a backyard, and we set them on fire one by one. The smoke alarm went off in this angry, hysterical way, and the neighbor from across the hall knocked asking if we were making popcorn or burning the building down, and we stood there laughing through tears, waving a dish towel at the alarm while the last corner of paper turned into ash and fell into the pan. It felt childish and ridiculous and somehow perfect. The kitchen smelled like a bad camping trip. We opened all the windows and stood in the draft and kissed with the alarm finally quiet. After, I pulled up my phone and went to the folder I'd been keeping like some strange talisman, screenshots and messages, the old Instagram request, all the brittle little artifacts of grievance. I deleted them. Then I texted her from the couch, even though she was right next to me, "I choose you. Not because the past adds up to 0, not because it's fair. I choose you because you're my family." She looked at me and said, "I need to hear that 100 more times in 100 different ways," and I told her to hold me to it. We still have the cardiologist appointment. I'm still not taking back the words I said years ago, because I can't pretend I didn't feel them. But I am done letting them set the temperature of our house. We wrote a joint note to him, short, final, and more about protecting our daughter than avenging our pride. Then we blocked him everywhere and put our phones face down. We lay there with our hands on her stomach, waiting for a kick that didn't come, listening to the city through the screen, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something settle in me. The ledger doesn't fit in a crib. I want our daughter to learn that love can be a choice you make even with your hands shaking. I want to be the kind of man who can make it. We'll see if I am. Tomorrow, we show up again. Update 3. The fetal cardiologist's office looks like someone tried to make a machine feel safe. There are animal decals on the wall and a mobile over a leather chair, the kind of optimism you hang over bad news. We're both early, so we sit and listen to the aquarium filter hiss and pretend that the looped video of a smiling baby on mute is not taunting us. When they call her name, she squeezes my sleeve instead of my hand like she's trying not to leave a mark. The room is dark for the echo. The screen blooms to life and our daughter is suddenly a city of moving parts. 4 tiny chambers open and shut like good manners. The doctor is patient and particular, narrating in a voice that makes me think of differential equations. She shows us the valves, the outflow tracks, the twists of vessels that are supposed to twist. And then, there it is, one beat that jumps the cue, and another, and then a flurry like she's running from something we can't see. Premature atrial contractions, the doctor says, almost gentle. And a brief run of supraventricular tachycardia. That's the fast rhythm you're seeing. Her heart muscle looks healthy. She's not in failure. Sometimes this resolves on its own. Her pen taps the paper once. She draws us a graph of tiny mountains. The words she uses are not catastrophic, but they're not casual either. We talk about hydration and cutting caffeine and watching for signs that her body isn't keeping up. We talk about what happens if it's sustained. Medicine through my wife to get to the baby, names that sound like spaceships and poison but are, apparently, hope. We schedule weekly listens with a nurse, more echoes. We make a plan that is just specific enough to show us all the ways it could go wrong and all the ways it might not. We leave the hospital humming with fluorescent light. At a red light, my wife puts my palm flat against her stomach through her shirt like a reflex. It's still too early to feel much, most days. I say, "Hi, kid," into the heel of my hand and get back nothing but my own breath. When the light turns green, we drive past a store selling cribs and another selling tiny shoes and then a funeral home that always has white lilies in the window. I don't know why it makes me want to laugh. We don't go back to work. We go home and make the bed with sheets that somehow always smell like last summer no matter how many times we wash them. I prop the Echo printouts on the dresser next to the picture from our wedding where her jaw is open in a laugh and my tie is crooked. The doctor's graph looks like a mountain range we're going to have to cross on foot. At 5 p.m., because the nurse told us to pick a time and keep it, we lie down and put one hand on my wife's stomach and one hand over each other's ribs. We breathe like we were taught, counting out loud. On the second inhale, something taps under my hand. It's not dramatic, more like a fish turning in a pond, but we both freeze and then look at each other like we've just heard a word we didn't know we knew. Then there it is again. We say her name without saying her name. We don't have one yet, but we say it like there's one waiting in a pocket somewhere we'll reach into at the right moment. That night I tell my wife something that's been rattling in my mouth like a tooth. I say, I can't unsay what I said. I won't pretend I didn't feel what I felt. But I'm done treating it like a banner I get to fly. I don't want to win at this anymore. It comes out messy, not noble. She looks at me for a long time and then nods and says, "Okay. Then don't." It is both the easiest and hardest thing she's ever asked me to do. The next day we go to another appointment, this time not for a heart, but for a boundary. Her mom is making soup and the whole house smells like something warm and old. We sit at the table and tell her, kindly and plainly, that while we love her for loving us, we need her to stop carrying things between rooms that aren't hers to carry. Her lips tremble, then she says, "You're right," and takes my wife's hand in a way that makes me want to leave the room so they can have a moment that didn't require me to be here. My wife squeezes back. Later, in the car, she exhales like she's put down a bag she's been pretending wasn't heavy. In therapy, our therapist gives us an assignment she calls 2 minutes of truth. It's not dramatic. We set a timer and say something as plainly as we can without trying to solve it. The first night, my wife says, "I am terrified that love won't be enough when things get hard," and the timer buzzes and she stops. My chest goes hot. When it's my turn, I say, "I regret being cruel. I don't regret surviving. I wish those things weren't braided together." My voice cracks on the word cruel. She nods once and it feels like we've made a door where there was only wall. We go to a baby class on a Saturday because it seemed like something adult people do. There are 6 couples circling a plastic doll while an instructor with a braid shows us how to swaddle. The doll looks a little like an alien. We take turns and my wife teases me because I fold too tight, and the instructor tells me I'll get used to the difference between snug and strangling. Everyone laughs and then we're all embarrassed because we're laughing about breathing in blankets while 9 tiny lives float around us, waiting. On Monday night, my phone rings from a number I don't know and my stomach drops like I've been caught doing something I haven't done. The old panic, the old certainty that every unknown is a grenade. I let it go to voicemail and my wife watches my face like it's a weather report. We sit on the couch and listen to it together on speaker like 2 cops reviewing a statement. It's just the cardiology office, a scheduling change. We both laugh, too loud. My wife lets her head fall onto my shoulder and says, "We are so dumb sometimes," and I say, "We are so alive." At 2 in the morning a few nights later, she wakes me up with a voice I've never heard come out of her. I'm bleeding. The word is small and enormous. The bathroom light is nuclear. There's a smear on the toilet paper that could be anything and, for 10 minutes, is everything. We drive to the hospital like we're both holding our breath underwater. The triage nurse is a hard candy of a person who knows exactly how to unstick someone's panic with her tone. They hook my wife up and we listen to a horse gallop blare across the room, fast, then faster, then settling back into something almost normal. A doctor with sleepy eyes explains cervical polyps and increased blood flow and how no one tells you this part of pregnancy is a horror funhouse of benign things that feel like the end of the world. He says the arrhythmia is there, yes, but not sustained. He tells us to come back for what we're already coming back for. He doesn't make promises he can't keep. We leave with a pad and a printout and the kind of exhaustion that feels like the floor isn't where you left it. We eat cereal on the rug when we get home because the table feels too formal. My wife suggests a name that belonged to her grandmother and I roll it around in my mouth and it tastes like a street we could live on. I say a name that belonged to no one and she smiles in a way that makes me think it might become someone. We don't decide, which is its own kind of decision. The next echo is better and worse. Fewer extras, one longer sprint. The doctor leans back and thinks for a long time without looking at us, which is somehow kinder. She says we're still in the watch and wait zone. She says if it becomes a marathon instead of a sprint, we'll treat. The nurse jokes that she wishes all her patients came with manuals and then pats my wife's knee and tells her she's doing everything right even though all we're doing is showing up and drinking water. That night, I open my laptop and write a letter that starts with hi, because I don't know how else to address someone who doesn't know English yet but knows my voice. I tell her we burned our scorecards and that sometimes we still trace the numbers in the air, out of habit. I tell her that her heartbeat is not a metronome for me to march my pride to. I tell her that if the first thing she teaches me is how to listen without needing to be right, then she will have given me more than any ledger ever did. I don't show the letter to my wife. I fold it and put it in the box with the echo pictures and the hospital bracelets from that night we thought the world might end and it didn't. On a Sunday morning, the neighbor from across the hall, the one who banged on our door during the Great Sink Fire, catches me by the elevator and asks how we're doing in that way people ask when they know the real answer is complicated. He says he has an extra Allen wrench if we're building something, and I almost ask him to come help me build a person. I say, a crib, and he says, same thing, and hands me the tool. My wife and I put it together on our living room floor with a podcast yammering in the background about nothing important. She reads the instructions out loud and I follow, and we don't argue about which screw is which. When we stand it up, it looks like a small boat. We both stare at it like it's going to tip. I don't know if this is the part of the story where the music swells and everything gets simple. It doesn't feel like that. It feels like the kind of quiet that can break either way. But last night, when the house was finally still and my wife was snoring almost imperceptibly, the little fish in her belly turned again and then again, and I pressed my ear to her side and heard nothing but imagined tides. I whispered, tomorrow we show up, and felt ridiculous and sacred all at once. Then, because no one can hear you be foolish at 1 a.m, I said it again. And again. Until the words were just breath and the room was just the room and our whole life felt like something we could carry. Update 4. At 3:11 a.m. the house had that brittle silence where even the refrigerator sounds guilty. She nudged me awake with the back of her hand the way you touch a switch you're afraid will spark and said, she's fast. I can feel it. I didn't know you could hear speed in a room until then. We drove through a city that hadn't decided to be morning yet. Every red light felt personal. Triage again. Same hard candy nurse, same paper bracelet biting into her wrist. The monitor's paper curled out of the machine like a ribbon and showed us what panic looks like when it has a rhythm. 200 beats. 218. A sprint that ignored the finish line. I watched the doctor's face build a plan in real time. She said the names from the pamphlet voice, flecainide, sotalol, digoxin. She talked about conduction and QT intervals like rubber bands you don't want to snap. She put her pen down and looked at us with human eyes and said, we treat through you. I signed a consent with the kind of care you use to sign for a package at Christmas. My wife asked, is she okay? The doctor said, right now she's trying to be. They moved us to a room that felt like a motel designed by a metronome. They got lines into my wife while someone taped a piece of paper to the wall with the words maternal telemetry so big I wanted to fold the edges down and hide them. The first dose made my wife's eyelashes flutter like they were trying to signal something. She said she could taste metal. The baby didn't slow. The second dose, later, hit the world with a small tilt. And then, like the feeling when a storm decides not to take your tree after all, the graph gentled. 140, 138, 132. My wife let out a breath that sounded like an apology to herself. I didn't realize I was crying until a nurse handed me a tissue with a gentleness that made me want to tell her our whole life. They admitted us overnight to watch the rubber band. Telemetry leads bloomed on my wife's chest and the monitor ticked like a polite bomb. Someone came in at 6 a.m. with a tray of clear broth, despair and smiles. We took turns pretending it wasn't funny and then laughing because it was. Her mom texted a string of hearts and a picture of the dog in a sweater, and we told her we loved her and to stay home because we couldn't carry anyone else's fear with our own. She sent a thumbs up that felt like a medal for boundaries. In the afternoon a volunteer rolled a harp into the hallway like that's a normal thing people do. It was absurd and exactly right. My wife was tethered to a machine and still somehow we stood and swayed, a slow dance with an 4-pole as a third partner. The harpist played something that sounded like water learning to be song. My wife leaned her forehead to my collarbone and said, muffled, I want to pick a name we won't use to keep score. I said a name I'd been saving like a small light. She said a different one that tasted like a road we could take. The monitor clicked along like a metronome practicing patience. Somewhere between the second and third song, we landed on a name that had both our sounds in it. It wasn't an event. It felt like finding a coin you thought you lost in a jacket you forgot you owned. We didn't write it down. We said it once into the space between us and the machine heard and minded its own business. That night the doctor came back with a face like good news that needed disclaimers. She said the episodes could come back, that we'd keep the medicine and watch the rubber band and that she'd rather this be a sprint we interrupt than a marathon we chase. She talked about steroids we might need later if the weather turned. She didn't use the word high drops and I didn't ask her to. We nodded like students trying not to fail and thanked her as if thanks could adjust an outcome. When we finally went home, The building smelled like other people's dinners. There was an envelope propped against our door, no return address, my name in a handwriting that looked like someone trying to be careful. My stomach fell through an old trapdoor I thought we'd nailed shut. I didn't open it. I didn't move. I just held it by the corner like it might go off. My wife came up behind me, put her palm at the small of my back, and said, not asking, with me. We took it inside, walked straight to the sink, and set the pan on the stove like a ritual. We didn't read a word. The paper burned in a curl that made its own decisions. The alarm went off again like it was auditioning for Broadway. The neighbor pounded and shouted, popcorn or arson? Through the door and I yelled back, closure, and he said, cool, like that's a thing people say near fire. We stood in our stupid smoke and I thought, there are 1,000 versions of me that would have read that letter alone and then told myself it was brave. I watched ash snow into water and felt a quiet I didn't have to earn. We did the 2 minutes of truth on the couch with our hair smelling like camping. I said, I am so scared that being her father will put a mirror to every ugly part of me I've been pretending is art. She said, I am so scared that if she ever sees me as weak, she'll think that's the same as being unworthy. The timer buzzed. No one fixed anything. We sat there with the phone face down between us like a little grave for our worst habits and let the truth be a creature we didn't cage. When the medicine made my wife's hands shake, I held them. When the medicine made her dizzy, I talked to the ceiling and called it by the names I knew it had and the names I made up. When the medicine thinned her patience, she snapped at me over nothing and I let it hit and pass and then we both apologized the way good people do when they're tired of being brave. At 5 p.m., our listening time, the baby tapped the inside of her like a secret knock. I pressed my ear to my wife's belly and spoke the name we'd chosen into the seam of a hospital bracelet. I told our daughter it's okay to be too fast sometimes, that her dad was too fast for years and is learning how to stand still. 3 days later, at the follow-up, the doctor drew another mountain range we could hike without leaving our chairs. Fewer stutters. One sprint, cleanly caught. We nodded like people being allowed to keep something they thought might be taken. On the way out, without talking about it, we stopped in the hospital chapel. It smelled like wood polish and old breath and faith on its lunch break. There were votives and little red cups and a guest book where people wrote to no one and everyone. My wife peeled off her bracelet and looped it around my finger, and I did the same. We said 5 sentences that weren't from our wedding and were somehow the only vows we've ever really understood. No ledgers. No ghosts. 2 minutes of truth. Choose each other when it's boring, not just when it's burning. Show up. Back home, we folded tiny onesies slow like they were made out of willpower. The neighbor's Allen wrench lived in my pocket like a talisman. Her mom texted us that she found her grandmother's rosary and did we want it for the crib, and we told her yes even though neither of us prays in any official way. We hung it on a nail above the small boat we built in the living room and it tinked against the wall like a metronome learning jazz. At midnight, when the building had settled into its bones, my phone lit up on the table with an unknown number. My heartbeat did a sprint and then remembered itself. I let it go. The voicemail was a scheduling bot mispronouncing my last name. We laughed in relief that sounded like we'd gotten away with something. My wife rolled onto her side and winced and then smiled and took my hand and put it where our daughter was learning the choreography of being alive. Do you hear it? She asked. I didn't. Not with my ear. But I do now in that place behind my ribs, the one that used to hold all my grudges like prized fish. Something else lives there. I can't unsay what I said. I still won't pretend I didn't feel what I felt. But the banner is down. The house is quiet. The graph above the dresser looks like a range we might actually cross without breaking. In the morning I'm going to call the neighbor and give him back his wrench and ask if he knows how to hang a mobile level because I want our girl to have something that spins when the light hits it. Then we're going to fill a small notebook with the names of all the places we want to take her when she is exactly old enough to remember and exactly too young to know why the world is so sharp and so soft at the same time.